Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Mix and Mash Battle Lounge with the 2MK team. Today we are testing out a new method of doing this.
Akira.
And specifically, we're going to be shifting people out of the lounge to go find their own opponents and their own lounges and possibly come back when they are eliminated. Other than, of course, the mainstream channel. In this case, we are not going to be having Rune Siren, Kansuki Dynasty, actually shift around. But everyone else may come and go. And that means there may be times when it's not possible to get into the lounge. The lounge itself is smaller. While people are arranging things, keep an eye on the stream if you want to join in. It'll help you realize when you have the option to do that. This is, as always, a US East Coast or basically Atlantic Rim style lounge. As long as you live anywhere on the rim of the Atlantic Ocean and you feel you have good enough internet, you're free to join in. Of course, at the moment, it looks like the lounge is relatively full in terms of people having their positions, so if you don't, and you're counting on, for example, managing because you're from the Midwest, note that there may be some characters and players who you do not in fact have good connections with. Today though, since they're likely to be moving around and might even not be here anymore, after certain matches, you can still think about it. We're not necessarily going to be talking about a whole lot today. As usual, it depends on who actually comes in and what kinds of things we see. So you can generally assume that the lounge is going to be about 3 out of 6 at any given time, and if you jump in, therefore you won't necessarily have to wait too long for your own match. Because of this, you're also not likely to see any matches from anyone else's training if they go off anywhere. Unlike usual, where you get more looks at different things. Which means it's not really the same sort of mix and mash as usual. But from the perspective of what challenges we will face and what other people will be able to do, it's about the same. That Akira bot practice coming in really handy right now.
You win.
High defense rating today. Well, Kansuki Dynasty has been working on a ton of things related to that, so it's not that surprising that it's actually come up.
Round 1. Fight.
And of course, you lose some of your rating on defense if your opponent's offense is particularly strong. Whereas our 46th president is usually working on offense at least a bit because it's, they're relatively speaking, it's their weak point. They're very patient, unlike our Kami here, but also therefore don't always take advantage of positions that they could and end up playing relatively defensively. So if you don't make a ton of mistakes, you're usually in a better situation. Whereas your best bet facing Rune Siren is keep pressuring and hope that she hits a button when she shouldn't. But since she is playing relatively quietly today, let's say, it's a little bit easier to deal with these things. My voice is odd today. I'm not sure it's bad, and it's not my usual problem when I'm sick, but it does seem to be a little bit different, therefore another reason why I may not be saying a lot. Alright, I can say that I'm proud of the bot, if only because it gives such a clear idea of what range to stand at against this character. And obviously, when you can go a little bit crazy with your own actions. That is a hard whiff punish to do. I would not suggest trying it. That one is less hard.
Final round. Fight.
This ties almost exactly into something we were discussing when reviewing matches. Whether or not Kazuki Dynasty is particularly effective in any given round is almost entirely based on whether or not she lands the first hit and therefore can play as if she has the life lead. Because generally, if she doesn't land the first hit, she will not play as if she has the life lead, and it leads to this sort of thing happening. The opponent plays more defensively, but I mean, you can't really do much. If you don't have the life lead and your opponent's defending, then you lose. Unless your character has a really good, basically assured open-up style pressure. But there is one thing you generally can do to nearly anyone. Almost all characters like this can be walked down all the way to the corner. Players in particular. Is that gonna hit? Nope. So, it really comes down to make that your actual opening gambit. If your opponent is particularly defensive, just start the match by walking them all the way to the corner. Thinking about whether or not you manage to land the first attack in a game like Street Fighter where that doesn't actually reward you with anything, then it's not really important. In Koihime, for example, you get a whole meter out of this, and in other games you get a bunch of other stuff. But in this game, when everything is simplistic relative to the point of footsies and meter, especially at, like right now at the very beginning, just walk the opponent all the way down. If you can get some white health damage in there, great, but being willing to do that, showing that you're willing to do that, will often get a much stronger response. And instead of walking away from you, they will actually stand there long enough for you to do actual offense. Of course, recognizing that this has happened is probably the most important part. When your opponent is not walking backward anymore, they're explicitly standing there and letting you walk up to them and waiting for you to make an error. There's a difference between I am taking myself slowly backward while you swift at me, and I am actually backing off because I don't know what to do. Cammy in particular, well, basically Kazuki Dynasty has switched to using the spinning attack as her main V skill, which is not really all that great because her fighting style doesn't make use of it basically at all. You can see that it doesn't actually pay off here, but there are a few characters where this matters, and I feel as if she fought enough of those characters recently to cause that to come up. Still, it's important to understand your own mental state when it comes to picking your V skill. And of course, there is something to be said for matchups, but a lot of the time, your V skill choice has to do a lot more with the way your opponent plays the game than anything relative to the specifics of the matchup. Now, obviously, the matchup informs which thing you're looking for from that, but at the end of the day, you're still facing the same problem. The opponent is going to do a specific thing that is probably going to annoy you, and you have to think about what that thing is likely to be based on both their character's capabilities and your general way of playing. So this matchup is basically zero use for the spinning axe, and while there is very little use, relatively speaking, for the other spin knuckle, you can get into positions where spin knuckle is a good idea. Particularly when it's likely to cross up or be used as a very weird type of whiff punish. Like right there, for example, where you think, I can't finish this combo, but it doesn't actually matter because you don't have to finish the combo as well so much as you have to keep the pressure on. Ah, no whiff punish. Oh well. The other thing she was working on is similar to the President's issue, let's say. They're both very tense players. And you can see it in the staccato style of their movements. They're not necessarily twitchy, nor are they necessarily, like, always on defense, but they are very stressed players, both of them. And that doubles the stress of the actual matches they play. You can almost see that they are not feeling particularly fluid in those moments. Alright then, let's assume once again that this is going to be more or less a lie. The connection here is never meaningful. There's some stutter, but that's a ping indicator more so than anything else, and therefore I'm expecting to have a different type of a hero match. One with much more I'm timing my way through you offense. Of course, as that happens, I have a lot less to say because it's not going to be about the matchup between these two characters, which is also fairly straightforward, but more so the matchup between these two players. So you get to just watch for a bit without actually anything being said.
Round one. Fight! Round two. Fight! You win! Round one. Fight! Round two. Round one. Fight!
Spiral arrow! Easy! Mission complete.
Round two. Fight! You win! It's go time! Let's do this!
I'll be on guard.
Rose!
Your skill. I now wish to test it.
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you!
What's the meaning of fate? You shall know.
Round one. Fight!
Sword cut! Spiral arrow!
This is your fate.
Spiral!
Try to learn to use your power a little better.
Round two. Fight!
Spiral arrow! Auntie!
Final round. Fight. You lose. Round one. Fight.
Well, it looks like our previous ping difference has resolved itself in some form. Also, this costume is great. Rose has just about the right amount of rhythm bonus and benefit in Footsie's over Cammy. Whereas Kareen can keep up, Chun-Li and Cammy have a lot more trouble with it because of just the specifics of their moves and the way they try to reach. But Rose does have to take some risks with her back heavy kick, I believe it is. And learning the spacing for that can be a little difficult. Once you've got it though, it's not really too hard to deal with these characters. You can just hit heavy kick for most of this match, honestly. Because it's so difficult for them to get into a position on screen where it's not going to help. At least one of the heavy kicks is going to do something.
You must be careful.
And since she has that basically zoning jump to go with it, while they're focused on getting to a position where they could launch some actual offense, she is free more or less to jump. When I say zoning jump, I mean a jump arc and a heavy kick that are so long, relatively speaking, that if the character decided to not hit any buttons, they might be hard to anti-air. But you might get hit anyway.
Final round. Fight.
Of course it helps that Rose as a character tends to have a lot of options. While she's not strictly speaking a Footsie's character anymore, she has so many good ways of doing things and making you think about how to punish her that you have to do quite a lot of work. Once you know how to do said work, you're usually fine, but until then, your life is kind of stressed.
You must be careful.
One of the most important things you can usually learn on your own character, therefore, is
You win.
what can I do that will prevent me from getting hit by Rose's normals? And you might be surprised how weirdly those interact with things. Cammy's not one of the better characters for it because she basically only has her light kick and stand medium punch, and she doesn't really get to convert off either of them. But they're still helpful. If she's trying to get up to Rose and Rose is hitting buttons to prevent her, her light kick goes a long way, or rather, it goes longer than most light kicks. Not that you actually get direct advantage after hitting with the light kick, but you get enough that the problem you were trying to solve, namely can I get closer, is resolved. It also of course opens up options for hitting your forward heavy kick and doing dive kicks. Don't think there was a way out of that.
Round 2. Fight.
Because of the way the startup for Rose's Soul Punish works. Not punish. What is that move called now? Basically her uppercut style move that catches people out of the air and shouldn't work on that most of the time. But to be fair, we have not really tested that a lot. It's not exactly a move you want to put in a bot to be constantly doing.
Final round. Fight.
Is that stressful throw range? That, on the other hand, is fine. So I guess that's technically the answer.
You lose. Let's do this.
Well, ain't you a high-def picture of strength? I'm shaking here.
Round 1.
Ed can do pretty well in this matchup against defensive players by perfectly spacing the skill you just saw, which really helps. Hitting medium kick, as you just saw, which also really helps. And most importantly, which would not probably be intuitive, using max range Psycho Spark when in pose and wanting to get back in. The reason for this is that the max range Psycho Spark is a good feint to make someone think you're doing Psycho Upper, which lets you do more Psycho Upper. And that will usually set it up so that they continue to be defensive at that spacing. But their expectation is, okay, I'm going to defend, or I'm going to hit a button if I see something. This is really important because you get to dash once you've set this up. Under normal circumstances, you can't dash because your opponent is waiting for you and will hit a button before you can do anything after the dash animation, at which point you're just closer and it's not helping you. The Heavy Punch and the Psycho Spark, on the other hand, are good overall because they just take up that space and technically are faster than dashes. If they just see something happening and start hitting buttons, then things shift really fast. But that's relatively complicated. There's like 3 spaces to this. When Ed is this close, as you're seeing now, there are a lot of weird things that can be done, but you have to convince the opponent, look, I get to do things now. And it's hard to convince the opponent to do that. However, Just Fine has managed right now, which is why you're seeing so many more buttons put out. Psycho Spark is actually a really easy move to stop. Nearly any advancing move will hit Ed out of it without actually taking any damage half the time. But a defensive opponent is usually put on the back foot pretty heavily by this move. And if they keep on backing away, out of the range of the move is one of the few moves in the game where it's like, okay, I can use this as a footsie tool, but because you have decided to back out of the range of this move, I'm just going to wait a moment and then I'm going to launch a projectile at you. I'm not committing to a projectile you can jump over. And I'm not setting up a situation that is likely to lead to me dying. I'm just hitting this projectile because I can, and you don't get to do it. Now, against any character that has a good long reach and a good reason to use it right away, this isn't going to work too well. Most characters like Lara will just go, okay, well, I have a move that can close that level of gap and be safe, so I should be fine. But Akira doesn't actually have any of these moves. She can advance quite quickly, but she actually usually wants to do that from a longer range, not a close one. An opponent who either wants to come in really quickly or jump can be dealt with by the medium kick, so you just use that as your defensive option most of the time. This is particularly required for Akira, who will tend to go for cross-ups, and this isn't specifically messed up Psycho Upper, but it isn't great. Depending on her position and how much you let her get away with up until that point, you can get yourself into some trouble trying. Reversal die.
Akira wins. Round 1. Fight!
you see the outcome mostly of using the Cycle Spark from too far away. Generally, it's such a telegraph move that one can jump it. Now you can also use this as a standard bait and just not throw the fireball off, but you're also counting on the fact that your opponent isn't going to effectively safe jump, as in see it coming and immediately jump, because it's actually kind of hard if they think you're doing it right away, and if you delay the actual projectile launch part for any reason, at long range, you may not be able to punish them even with an anti-air. Akira as a character also, as mentioned, suffers a little bit from not being able to always catch Ed to punish Ed stuff at max range.
Oh man, down to the wire.
Final round. Fight.
This is particularly distressing, let's say, for the President here, because being a player who's used to punishing and reacting, when one is faced with a character who will whiff punish you for attempting your own punish, your life gets really hard because you have to spend so much time suppressing your urge to do what's most natural to you. Adding on top of that, that if you did get it, you're not necessarily able to do anything with it. Like, you land a little bit of damage and you don't usually even get a good knockdown.
Ed wins.
This sort of thing allows Ed to bully a player of this type pretty hard, because they have to react to things they're not used to having to react to, and use longer range, sometimes unsafe moves, or at least questionably safe moves, to prevent just being forced into the same situation over and over.
Let's do this.
When facing a more offensive Akira player, the priority of these things switches around. You do definitely still use all the tools mentioned, but you use them for different purposes very slightly. An aggressive player is looking to find their way through your defense, so the Psycho Spark doesn't act as strongly as a defensive tool, and neither does the Sway. The Sway can help, but it's not really the main thing you're aiming for. In this case, the dash forward, especially if you're not close enough up to actually do anything from it, turns out to be kind of useful, especially dash blocking. Because players who are looking for ways to get in on you tend to have a slightly weaker response to you dashing at them. And from there, Ed has pretty good pushback, and as explicitly said, Akira doesn't necessarily handle it all that great when the opponent is controlling the end of the block string range. This means that Akira's generally best option is to jump, and then Ed has use of the medium kick to resolve almost every jump she has. You can also sway your way out of the jump if you think it's coming, while still using that as an offense tool if you think they're going to try to get away from you. So, rather than trying to go for max range, on the sway, you use the sway as the chase down. You expect your opponent's going to try to get away from you, so you sway attack them, and just don't worry too much about what happens after that. The medium kick, on the other hand, is the thing you hit from relatively close when you think they're going to try to get in on you in some way. And the rest of your time is spent making them jumpy by dashing up at them. The Psycho Spark, therefore, coming in finally as, okay, you've let me get close enough, I can hit a block string but nothing else. Now that you've hit the block string, you can basically either hit the medium kick or the Psycho Burst. Spark, Spark. The Psycho Spark will usually work there because the startup of your opponent's longer range moves that they would be using to get in, at least on Akira, will probably be too slow to get them anywhere.
Fight.
Learning how to shift around that sort of thing when you are using the same tools but for different purposes can make matchups feel less stressful in many ways because you don't have to think of a whole new set of tools to use, just a new way to use tools you were already using. Perfectly through. And free reversal to back to corner. This also, of course, helps you save that meter for that move. Yet Psycho Upper is mainly good because of how good a knockdown it has. But what you are definitely seeing here is the Ed back dash dash game. Basically, Ed's footwork is good enough to get away with a lot of stuff here. And you can just switch to playing defensive for a bit, leaving your opponent there thinking about the fact that, okay, well, you were just trying to get in on me, I should be waiting for this dash, and then you just, you know, chill out. But that is Akira's biggest problem here. She can't reach Ed. And that is probably not going to change. I can't think of a single way that the character just goes, okay, yeah, I'm set now. Her forward heavy punch will help, but it does not help enough for most things. That, for example, wasn't even EX.
Ed wins.
The reason this comes up is as because we've mentioned before, these two characters are actually really similar, but it means you have to play Akira differently against Ed because they are so similar, because it's so close to a mirror match. You generally have to be doing the same amount of dashy footwork, poking, pressing buttons to push back to specific ranges, and not necessarily expecting to get a lot of openings out of doing this. It's a very throw-heavy, dash-heavy matchup. At least, everything I've seen. Normally I would say at this level, but every time I've seen it, which is not a lot because not a lot of people play Ed, it turns into this very dash back and forward thing with much less standard footsies in the way you'd expect.
harmony. That is the truth of what you must seek. Cloud. Round one.
Last week we discussed the power of Gil's forward-moving fire kick shutting down Nikali just because of the ranges. Nikali's options are so limited in the situation that it's kind of depressing almost. But this isn't to say you can do nothing, because it's the same thing as always. We teach people to whiff punish Gil because Gil has so much priority, so much range, so much control of the space that you have to learn to whiff punish Gil. Nikali doesn't have a lot of great options for this because Nikali has to move around in specific ways, and generally either backdashing or neutral jumping is more or less your only option. That said, fortunately, Gil tends to spend a lot of time moving forward in this matchup without attacking upward, which means if you do get off the ground in time, the neutral jump is likely to come up with some amount of helpfulness. But of course, keeping track of this character isn't exactly the easiest thing for Nikali to do as a whole. Nikali has relatively linear attack spaces, and when they work, it's usually more so because Gil didn't manage to counter it. Now, of course, you can absolutely play well enough or crazily enough to overwhelm another player, but we still don't generally consider that to be a good matchup. That's a matter of you being an overwhelming offensive person, or them being too rigid in their ways of defending against people who do unexpected things. Generally, the more calm, let's say, when you can't phase the Gil player, when they just go, yeah, like, whatever, yes, you've done a crazy thing, but this doesn't matter to me because people do crazy stuff all the time. Those sorts of reactions from Gil players tend to be really problematic for everyone facing them. Because one of the easiest ways to deal with this character is to have the player think about, why would you do that? Why did you do that? Why did you do this thing? Because Gil requires so much presence of mind to do most of Gil's stuff with any serious intent. Just the idea that you would be doing it wrong can mess people up. If you find you are that sort of person who constantly has trouble because your opponent's doing crazy things and you don't understand why they don't, like, slow down, just re-reversal them. Because Gil doesn't desperately need the V-trigger in this matchup. In fact, it doesn't really help much at all. It's easier to just re-reversal them off you, go back to zoning them, and not worry. For example, that there made zero sense. Partially because Gil is the sort of character who will do the long jumping kick you, and partially because, like, he just land and block, and then you don't get anything at all. The jumps are also very stoppable here. So, from the Gil player's perspective, the main thing you need is to find a way to get your self-calm back down when something that doesn't make sense to you has happened. And the easy way to do that is just re-reversal and don't think about it. Again, a movement that doesn't make any sense. Like, you can definitely just walk up to certain players, but this is generally poor. You are looking for a way to solve a problem that doesn't involve actually solving the problem.
I shall persevere. The curtain falls.
But, like, sometimes just being crazier wins.
Nikali wins. time. Let's do this.
See you, Kita.
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
Round one. Fight.
See the V skill 2 again? This is another matchup where it doesn't really do anything. But honestly, the spinning axe can help here if you go straight for the main option Cammy has in the matchup, which is pressure. Light kick, light punches, walk up throws, everything. Because the way that an Akali avoids pressure is something you can just guess and spinning axe. It works relatively well for neutral jumps, it works relatively well for that move. It's just so dominating in most situations that you're just thinking, okay, are you going to try to get out of my pressure string? It is not a footsie tool though, because Akali beats it with nearly everything he does, so you don't have to think about this as a option you have for playing footsies. She has so many better options for playing footsies with Akali that it's not really a thing.
Round two.
From the Akali side, of course, your aim would generally be to actually risk even harder, sort of. Get out of your bad situations using either your V-reversal or just uppercut. Resolving problems in this space can be kind of hard because Akali will jump, but Cammy doesn't necessarily care about that either. The spinning axe isn't a lot of help there, but she doesn't really need it for that. She has a good fast back and medium punch anti-air that at the ranges we're talking about, if Akali were to jump, then it'd be easy enough to clip him. She can use this even for like neutral jumps when close up. And in fact is one of the most important things to think about when you are learning this sort of character who has a lot of throw stuff and you expect your opponent to be neutral jumping. You have to learn that your throw, whiff, should and could be followed by your anti-air. You'll see this a lot on Lara players particularly, like they'll go for something, just throw, and the opponent jumps out of the throw, they just wait a little bit and do the medium punch. For Cammy it's slightly harder because she has to determine whether or not they jumped forward or not, but it's not usually hard enough that you have to care. Our Cammy is not so much used to the whole dash up, tap, pressure style game though, so you'll find that she'll just hit a lot of buttons instead of actually dashing or back dashing. Situations don't lead to this as much in her case. A similar discussion was the tendency to just, okay, I'm at this space, I hit this button. Or I have checked this thing, I hit this button. It works on people who don't defend a lot or who can't read your general demeanor, but people who expect you to do this will literally set up the situation of, okay, I'm going for this, were you ready? Yes. I know that I'm not in danger because you blocking my move means you're just going to hit a fairly standard block string that doesn't endanger me. It's very important to build up alternative block strings and the presence of mind to shift to them sometimes, especially when you already have enough health that if your opponent does something crazy because they think they can get away with it, you don't die. But it's going to be a long road for her to work on this tendency to not just, okay, I'm here hitting medium kick, okay, I'm here hitting crouch medium punch, those things. Unfortunately, Cammy's light kick is one of the best options in the game for this, to the point where people complained about it for a while. Just realizing, okay, I don't have to hit like a strong button to get away with this. I can just hit a little bit of button and see what happens. But right there again, it's just, okay, this is my crouch medium punch space, so I'm hitting crouch medium punch. This actually makes one relatively weak against other footsie characters because they will actually whiff punish you and set up the whiff punishes in question. So you have to be really careful there. Necalli fortunately doesn't have basically the footsie tools most of the time to get away with this. So she has some time to learn to adapt to not doing it.
Round 2.
Much stronger Cammy players will usually use those situations as an opportunity to go for dive kick actually. But it doesn't necessarily work on Necalli because Necalli is looking for other things related to that anyway. One of her more useful options is honestly to just jump over Necalli's head at closer range than most other characters do, because there isn't a good Necalli response to this, whereas Cammy gets good position after doing so, relatively speaking. But you'll see here that because of the way Cammy's medium kick works, for example, and the spacings they end up at, basically her medium kick gets jumped over every single time because it's just now at the point where the wolf knows you're going to hit the medium kick because we're at this spacing and I can jump over it, so I will.
Final round. Fight. You win. It's go time. Let's do this. Forgotten waterfall.
Be on guard.
Akira. Round 1. Fight! Round 2. Fight.
Quite a lot of this is almost directly Akira bot practice. The parts where you're seeing the stressor come out is actually something unrelated. Knowing that one needs to stay out of the range of Akira's stand heavy kick and not necessarily being able to whiff punish the move can be quite stressful, which is why it is a bot point. But it is one of those things where, again, once close enough, once starting to do things, Cammy doesn't really have to use the spiral arrow. She can use the V-Skill 1, which is again the point. If you figured the V-Skill 1 was going to be stopped, then the spiral arrow wasn't going to do you a lot of good anyway. So that's why it's important for these two players in this particular matchup to have her choose to use this move. Their example is another good use of it. The moment where you do not know what else to hit, none of Cammy's moves are definitely going to get advantage over Akira. Akira has the option to hit a button. The most deceptive possible thing you can do to mess up the Akira player's combos is to use your V-Skill 2, because things might not happen the way you expect them to, and they'll definitely be in the same situation. Now, of course, you face the same problem as always. You can hit Cammy out of her V-Skill. You can just grab her out of her V-Skill. But a lot of these things depend on the spacing that you choose to do these things at. And the readiness as well. It also offers her a generally quick way to get into positions that don't otherwise become available to her. But unfortunately, we had every punch again. That's going to be a lot of training, probably, because so far I don't think Kansuki Dynasty has actually trained using V-Skill 1 against the Kira bot. So whatever is happening now, she's just doing on the fly in terms of what spacing she can stand at for this to work. At the end of the day though, this move is plus, and that's probably the most important thing about it. Just having straight advantage. Because it does feed back into the thing we were talking about before. You can push your opponent all the way to the corner if they are expecting to have to constantly deal with that. It also frees up your mind space for a lot of other things that you normally don't get to think about. And helps reduce the stress of this extremely stressful player pairing. But slightly too slow, which ended in the trade instead of the advantage. Honestly, it wouldn't necessarily have mattered because, again, Akira can just like DP out of that if she wants to, and that would have been the time to do that if there was ever going to be a time to do that.
Let's do this.
I may have a lot to say, or I may have very little to say. This mirror match can be played basically in obvious ways, but with these two particular players, it's either going to be consistent in terms of one pushing and the other getting to punish them, or it's going to be probably a blow up in the other direction. So again, from the player perspective, again, it's really important for Suntier to manage the push back to corner situation, because the Akira that is outside of the corner has a big advantage. This character is relatively easy to corner guard and doesn't have great reach, so pushing back to corner is important. But one of the important things to learn is how often you actually have to hit buttons while pushing your opponent to the corner. Most of the time, if you hit buttons at the moment where your opponent stops backing off, you'll get whiff punished by them. Fortunately, Akira doesn't really have this problem because she can just use her special low kick to do this in almost every situation. Once you're in the corner, those moves are less useful, but it's not really a big deal. The main thing to be careful of is, as always, don't just go straight for the double low kick because your opponent tends to be defensive. They'll certainly at least look for the timing to do something else, and you'll have to be ready. I'm not sure if that's missing something or not.
Akira wins. Round one. Fight.
One particularly good option here is, again, the medium kick. Remember that Akira's medium kick will move you very slightly forward. And it's not terribly whiff punishable, so if you want to try to clip your opponent, or just to give them something to think about so that you hit the sum button while you're advancing, it's probably your better option. Do not underestimate the power of that kick. This matchup or not.
Final round. Fight. Akira wins. Let's do this.
We are back to having one space open in the lounge. And about 20 to 30 minutes of stream time left. Lounge may be a little longer.
Round one.
So back to discussions of this matchup, specifically from the Akira side now. There you see a good tool. Akira is pretty well set when it comes to using the neutral jump into air fireball to deal with Ed's movement. But at the end of the day, Ed doesn't have to care about it a whole lot. If fighting from far enough away, Akira will not manage to get much out of this. More importantly though, if the spacing is right for the B skill 2 from Ed's side, it actually doesn't matter. Which is probably the most confusing part of this. That said, you have to be fairly well versed in the spacings of this matchup for seeing Akira neutral jump to get the correct response from the Ed side, so it's still worth doing if just to add stress to the opponent. The more stress the opponent faces, the more likely they are to mess up the spacings on all of the other extremely spacing dependent things that Ed needs to do for the matchup to make sense. One of the important things that comes up a lot in matches around the globe here is, can you get your opponent to stop going backward, or can you stop yourself from going forward? Basically right now, none of us have this skill. It's super important, but probably due to all of the different other games we play, we just don't have the mental space for, yes, you're walking away from me, that means I'm winning, I don't have to do anything about this. When you get it into your head and you start seriously trying to break down your opponent's capacity to do any offense, it's a lot easier to do this. But when your own defense isn't perfect, then it's easier to feel as if you're going to lose if you play like this, especially if you don't land the first hit or have issues like that. This situation is technically still by far a winning situation for Just Vine's side, because it doesn't matter so much. It's not a whole lot of health lost, and Ed's fairly powerful, but if you get into bad situations, you can end up feeling like things are going to go poorly. It's very important that you don't spend too much time thinking about this.
Round 2. Fight.
Another thing that can become very difficult is learning not to do it as just, well, I can see the way you're playing, so I'm going to straight up go defense from the beginning. Because that's not really ever going to work. The opponent's goal is to outplay whatever you are choosing to be at that time. So if you show them, well, I don't think you have offense, they'll stand there and try to figure out offense, especially at the beginning of the match where they haven't actually taken any real damage yet. It's a large part of the emotional perspective required to win matches against defensive players that you have to convince them that you are going to keep attacking, but not actually care whether or not you succeed at doing so. This is heavily influenced by whether or not you are good at confirms, because if you are sufficiently good at confirms, then you almost automatically just win. Because you're not really trying to hit them, but once you do happen to hit them, things go in your favor fairly fast. This, for example, if it were a pro playing right here, this would be such a winning situation that they would not care on any level. I have meter, I have life lead, I'm not particularly cornered, etc. But at the same time, even they will still go in the realm of, okay, but I should still probably convince you that I'm going to keep attacking you. And that relies on not only their capacity to expect their opponent's movement, but their confidence in their own offense. But of course, pros have a lot of confidence in their offense, so it comes up.
Akira wins. It's go time. Let's do this.
It looks like we have a situation to deal with, therefore this will actually be the last on-stream match of the night. The lounge itself is still 2 spaces left and will probably be open for some time more at least, though the actual host of the lounge may change. It didn't turn out to be too much of the actual mix and mash, because it looks like we are back at the discovery phase of people thinking about and working out what they need to practice. So hopefully we'll see that coming up in the coming months.
For those who I wish to protect, I will fight you.
In terms of other content, one thing that's probably going to get in the way of that somewhat for Street Fighter is Melty Blood's release in 3 days. And that game is going to be one where people are just going to have to spend some time learning combos alone, as most of its systems are fairly obvious if you are someone who plays Unist, or they kind of take care of themselves, let's say. Melty Blood's design tends to be along the lines of, okay, how do I do this? Rather than, what is happening here? Which is really nice. So we're expecting to see a lot of that. Everyone's characters have been shown off. We're now pretty sure what each of us are playing, because they did a good enough job of that. I didn't actually see what one would call a grappler in that game, but it doesn't really matter most of the time because of their specific flows. And of course, we can probably all expect to see some new characters pop out over time, because that's the state of fighting games these days. We do not, however, have access to any information yet on how Melty Blood handles its training mode, dummy, movement stuff. Under Night probably doesn't have any way to update to be more like Street Fighter, and it's not something that most designers seem to think is, strictly speaking, important enough. But it is still French bred, which means there is at least a decent chance that we will get the bare minimum, i.e. what we got in Unist. We count this as the bare minimum required to make bots at all. The DOA problem is different, because DOA's bots work fine, but then they don't save them in between matches, which is interesting. I guess it's just a matter of memory available, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the actual design of the bot system. So, we're going to be checking into that as soon as possible. And obviously, the characters you're likely to get bots for first are whichever ones we determine to be the most useful for getting started, i.e. the not complicated ones. Or if it's one of those games where the thing you need the most is defense, and none of the CPU practice options help, we'll probably throw out Vlad Archangel first, because it's fairly obvious. Here's a new character, here's a zoning character, here's a big body character. A lot of people are going to be jumping on that character fairly early, especially if they haven't played the game before. And that matters a lot, because if you are going into any form of ranked in that game, the people you're going to face at the beginning are other people who don't know how to play the game. Everyone else is just going to rank out of your space, presuming that the matchmaking works properly. Someone who's been playing Michael Balindron for years is not going to have a whole lot of trouble ranking out of the lower echelons of whatever system they have. So, you will not probably be seeing Honest Bid's Michael as a bot too early into the process. We don't know how long it will take us to get them all done, but you might see a lot of prototypes coming out on our Twitter. That Twitter, of course, for those who are not aware, is 2_MK_FGC. And all of the bots in question can be found at 2-mk.org. Most likely it'll be under Melty Bots. The reason I called the Unist methodology the bare minimum is because it does not in any way separate bots by the character, and therefore forces you to input them again for various related reasons. We can hope that we get at least as much as, hey, if I turn on the game and input this, it will stay, and then I can put in a different character. But if not, we expect this to be much more difficult than Unist bots, because Unist bots have overlap in their movement and playstyles that I can sort of decode until I get something that works for one or two characters, so you can at least get two different types of work done. But from the looks of it so far, particularly when it comes to pressure, Melty characters are likely to be much more eclectic. Of course, given that there are simply less characters in the game, this isn't necessarily that big a difference, really. It's more so a matter of the fact that they changed enough of them out in terms of how they play that you're not going to be able to just do this. Either way, that brings us to the end of our stream for tonight, and you can still join in the lounge if you are anywhere in the area that is likely to have a good connection. We get a little more careful about that after a stream because there's less people. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.